What other interesting studies are you working on?
I'm working on a project. Have you ever been to Berlin, John?
Never. No.
Um, so Berlin is sort of known for its sort of nightlife and the city's relationship with techno music, drugs, and sort of hedonism um, is known worldwide.
Hmm.
And Berlin's nightlife scene is a great driver of tax revenue. It's a great driver of tourism, and it's very good for Germany's sort of soft power and reputation around the world. Like it's the place where you can lose yourself. And one of the interesting things about the Berlin nightclub scene is that, unlike other nightclubs around the world, and you can see similar things, but not to the same extent, um, that there are, bouncers, but they call themselves selectors who, are in charge of the door policy. And to get into a Berlin nightclub can be extremely, extremely difficult. And some German colleagues and I were interested and are interested and have studied how these selectors, who are highly cherished, well respected, important people in the nightlife and nightclubbing scene, how do they make their decisions within 1 to 3 seconds about whether you're coming in or not?
Hmm.
So what we've done is we have, observed how these selectors make their decisions. We've interviewed them. We've involved ourselves in training sessions because you may want to know that there are companies who essentially who provide training that takes 3 years for you to become a selector, where they teach you much in the same way. If you want to become an expert in wine, you need to go on a sommelier course to learn the difference between a zesty note and a oaky note. There are things that subject people to that sort of training. How do you know someone's safe? How do you know that somebody is going to contribute to the atmosphere? How do you know that they aren't going to cause trouble? So, one research, so that's the most recent piece of research that I'm currently in the stage of writing up. How these people make their decisions?
Man, I a lot of it is based on looks, right? It has to be.
And yes and no. And it's not as clear cut as you think. I always had the impression that if you're wearing, gear or clothes that are slightly off, or are able to signal that you aren't part of the community that the nightclub is sort of there to have present, that you're not coming in. And in many cases, all selectors want to know is can the person hold a conversation, and can they display confidence in the act of essentially being tested. And many cases, people aren't pulled away straight away. The reason why they may be, told that it's not their night immediately before they even get to the front of the queue is if they're too drunk.
Hmm.
But in the main, selectors want to have a short conversation with you where you need to reveal something about yourself that they find is interesting, charismatic, or demonstrates you understand, for instance, the DJs that are playing or the particular scene or subculture that is being attracted. So it's all to do with the conversation that they have, and it's not just simply a visual thing; it's like a interactional thing.
So in Berlin, in order to get into these, I guess some of these clubs, or is it all of them? But you almost go through like a little mini tryout. Then
Yeah,
you don't just pay and you get in. Like in America, most of the clubs, you just you pay your fee and you get in. But it doesn't work that way in Berlin, huh?
no, you've got to be subjected to a test by the selector, and the selector wants you to have a conversation. They want you to demonstrate that you are a safe pair of hands, you aren't going to cause trouble, and you're there for the right reasons. And you can do that in multiple different ways. And even if you turn up wearing, clothes that are not 100% sort of in adherence to the type of music that's being played, you can still get in if you learn how to use the art of conversation to signal that I may not look like I belong, but I actually do.
Wow.
Um,
So
yeah, yeah, it's a really fascinating.
help me visualize this. How does that? I imagine it'll take a long time then for occupants to enter into the club or the night scene. Are there multiple selectors out in front, or there's just one guy or person?
It's one person. Yeah, it's one person. Now
Wow.
they have sort of like your more traditional security and bouncery types to help, and they're there to essentially keep the queue adhering to particular behavioral standards. And if you're seen smoking or if you're seen drinking too much, the security won't ask you to leave straight away. They'll tell the selector, who then goes, "I've seen you drinking too much. Get out. It's not your night."
Wow.
Um, so yeah, so it is a test,
Wow.
and the test is, can you prove yourself in 3 or 5 seconds, either through your confidence, you don't want to be too cocky or too arrogant, that you've got a sense of humor, that you can maintain eye contact, that you can exude confidence but not brashness.
Mm.
It's a really interesting sort of art to watch these interactions play out.
Wow. So these selectors, you said they go to some type of training for a couple of years for each. Is this training different for all the nightclubs, or is there like a one place that all these selectors go? What does that look like?
So like the big name selectors, um, who made their name in the 90s when Berlin was like this utopian city where anything goes because no one owned land. It was a bit of a free for all. Now, obviously, they haven't been subjected to the training that we see now. But yes, there are organisations where selectors are sort of trained. It takes some time. Not everyone has the right skill. Not everyone has the right skill set to be a good selector. So yeah, it takes time. It takes 2 years.
That's fascinating. How much do these guys get paid? They make good money?
I've not asked directly. I don't think that much.
Hmm.
Um, and what people get out of it, and this was what was really nice and surprising in the research, was, and it may sound quite sort of uh, what's the correct word without swearing?
Oh, you can swear. It's okay.
Artistic.
Okay.
Like like the English would say, a little bit wanky.
Hmm.
Um, and that means when you speak to selectors, they use phrases like, "I'm building an artwork for the evening. I'm building a sculpture
Wow.
in which I am, over the course of the night, piecing together the right selection of people who I know, when they're face to face, when they've ingested drugs, when they're listening to techno, are able to feel intimately connected, even though they are strangers. And their role is to build that sculpture each and every night that allow something magical to be created." Now, that isn't the language of your average security guards who are just looking to sort of be aggressive and to display their masculinity. No, like it's seen as this sort of artistic form of work, which I thought was like, wow, you really think quite a lot of yourself. But I can understand the logic when you see their role as essentially being the first person that people see and being the last person they see when they leave. And that may be 8, 10 hours, 12 hours, 18 hours down the line. So you can understand how they tell this story about themselves. And I have a lot of respect, and I kind of like what you're doing there. I can understand that level of sort of celebration for the work that you're doing.
That's so deep, man. He's
Yeah, I know, I know.
that's
Now that may be because there's lots of drugs involved, and they come from that particular scene. However, like there is something true to it, and I had a lot of time and respect for people who take that work as seriously as they do.
yeah. I'm wonder that makes me curious about the other roles within the nightclub. Like, what kind of training like the DJs go through or the bar. Can you imagine the bartenders? Because I'm like that person. If so much emphasis is being put on the door guy, essentially the gatekeeper of the place, the establishment. I wonder what kind of training the bartenders go through.
Well, the bartenders, they tend to be people who want to become selectors. So
Oh.
selectors are like the head honchos. You know, they're like the big deal. They're the people who are highly celebrated and respected within the nightclub scene. And many of the people we interviewed started off as barkeepers and barmen who worked, you know, moving drinks, you know, from the back of the club to the bar and so on. And they all want to become selectors. And what's I think is really nice is watching the team of people, who are about 30, work in tandem. And one of the lessons that we learned from the Berlin case study is everybody, even from the barman to the security guard to the selector, it's all to do with providing, and this sounds like I know this phrase has a bit of a negative connotation in America, but like a safe space.
Hmm.
And if there's anything that is a red flag or you know, men who may be a little bit too persistent chasing women, they get kicked out straight away. There's no sort of warning. It's like, no, this is a respectful place where people come to lose themselves. And to lose yourself, you need to make yourself vulnerable.
Hmm.
And which means that any sort of thing that threatens that atmosphere is notified and is informed, and the selector know and the security team know, and the person is asked to leave. And they all work in tandem to provide that sort of, right, okay, this is a place where people can come here, know they can lose themselves, they can do things that they would otherwise not do. There's no photos allowed. You've got to hand your camera over, your phone over at the thing, because this is a place for people to lose themselves and to feel, you know, like they can be intimately connected with strangers.
That's where America is going wrong, man. Because if we do a comparison, the in America in the club scene, the bartenders are kind of the the big deal. It doesn't
Okay.
it doesn't take anything to be a bouncer other than, like you said, like being able to display your masculinity or be able to be kind of honcho, uh, to be the door guy. Everyone wants to be a bartender, and it's like it's it it's tough. Not everyone can make it being a bartender, but there's a lot of emphasis making it to that position and being like the head bartender, because sometimes there's like three or four different bars in a club, and there's like
Yeah.
the main bar, and to get to that bastard, like that's pretty tough. But anyone's gonna be the door guy. Like
Yeah. So yeah, I guess it's reflective of like priorities
ah,
and status and things like that. That's really and it's the same. It's the same in the UK. And when I go to Berlin, we do a lot of work where we just observe these people while sober, I have to add. And it was just like the way they run these things is completely different
hmm.
to the way it's run in the UK. And
Yeah.